The buzz of the airport terminal hummed in the air, a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, murmured conversations, and the occasional crackle of an overhead announcement. Renee Parker stood poised in the first-class check-in line, her sleek leather suitcase resting faithfully by her side. Its surface bore the faint scratches and scuffs of countless journeys, a quiet testament to the miles she'd traveled, both literal and figurative. She glanced down at her watch, the slim silver hands ticking steadily onward. It was still early, but she knew all too well how quickly a small delay could spiral into a cascade of missed connections and frayed nerves. The line inched forward at a glacial pace. Each passenger met with a practiced smile or a curt nod from the airline staff. Renee adjusted the lapels of her blazer, its tailored lines accentuating her understated grace. Her face remained serene, a mask of composure honed by years of navigating high-stakes boardrooms and tense negotiations. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a subtle tension coiled in her shoulders, a flicker of unease she couldn't quite shake as she watched the staff behind the counter. Karen Thompson, the supervisor, cut a striking figure amid the bustle. Her sharp cheekbones and tightly styled bob gave her an air of unyielding authority, and her voice clipped and commandingsless through the ambient noise like a blade. Next, she barked, barely sparing a glance at the passengers as she waved them forward with an impatient flick of her hand. Beside her, Mike Jacobs lounged against the counter, his posture loose and careless, a smirk tugging at his lips whenever something or someone caught his eye. The two of them shared a rhythm, an unspoken alliance that played out in sidelong glances and quiet chuckles. As Renee drew closer, she felt the weight of Karen's gaze sweep over her, quick and dismissive, accompanied by a faint narrowing of her eyes. Karen leaned toward Mike, her lips moving just enough to murmur something under her breath. Whatever it was, it earned a low laugh from him, the sound grating against Renee's ears. She chose to let it slide, her focus unwavering. Years of facing subtle slights and bold assumptions had taught her to pick her battles wisely. When her turn finally came, Renee stepped forward with measured confidence, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm yet edged with quiet strength. "I'd like some assistance with my flight. There seems to be a delay, and I wanted to check on the status." Before she could finish, Karen's hand shot up, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Your ticket, please," she snapped, her tone stripped of the polite veneer she'd offered the passengers before. Renee handed over her boarding pass without a flicker of hesitation, her fingers steady despite the slight tightening in her chest. Karen snatched it, her eyes darting over the details with a speed that suggested she wasn't truly looking. Then her lips curled into a faint, mocking sneer. "This is a first-class ticket," she said, her voice thick with disbelief, as if the very idea offended her. "Yes," Renee replied evenly, her gaze locked on Karen's. "That's correct." Karen flicked her eyes toward Mike, who let out an audible snicker, his shoulders shaking with barely contained amusement. "You sure you're in the right line?" he asked, his tone dripping with fake courtesy that did little to hide the derision beneath. He gestured lazily toward the economy check-in area, his hand waving as if shooing her away. "Maybe over there." Renee's jaw clenched, a fleeting shadow crossing her face before she steadied herself with a slow, deliberate breath. She'd faced this before too many times to count, but the sting never fully dulled. "I'm in the correct line," she said, her voice a smooth, unshaken surface over the roiling frustration within. "If you could just check on the delay." Karen cut her off again, her tone sharpening like a whip. "You'll need to wait. We're busy right now." Renee blinked, momentarily thrown by the sheer audacity of the dismissal. The line behind her had thinned, and the counter wasn't exactly swamped. "I've been waiting," she said, her voice still calm, but carrying a new firmness, a steel thread woven into its fabric. "I'd appreciate it if you could address my request." Karen let out a theatrical sigh, her eyes rolling skyward as if Renee's words were an unbearable burden. "You'll have to wait longer," she said, already turning to the next passenger with a barked next. Mike leaned in closer, his voice carrying just enough for Renee to hear. "Entitled much," he muttered, chuckling to himself as if he'd landed a clever jab. For a moment, Renee stood rooted to the spot, her calm facade a dam holding back the flood of indignation rising within her. She watched as Karen and Mike carried on, their attention sliding past her as if she'd ceased to exist. Their demeanor shifted seamlessly when the next passenger, a man in a crisp suit, stepped up, greeted by Karen's saccharine smile and Mike's attentive nod. The contrast was glaring, a slap of cold reality against Renee's skin. She stepped aside, not out of defeat, but to gather herself, her eyes sweeping over the counter staff with a predator's precision. She noted every detail: Karen's tight grip on her authority, Mike's lazy arrogance, the quiet complicity of the other employees who flicked their gazes her way, only to look down at their screens or shuffle papers. A younger woman, her hands fidgeting nervously as she typed, lingered near the edge of the counter. When their eyes met, Renee saw a flash of unease in her expression, a silent apology that hung in the air before she turned away. Renee offered her a small, knowing nod, a gesture that said she'd seen it all and understood. This wasn't new territory for Renee. She'd been underestimated before. Her presence dismissed or questioned in rooms where power was wielded like a blunt instrument. But the rawness of this encountered mockery, the casual cruelty, stirred something deep within her. She'd come to the airport expecting routine, maybe even respect, but instead she'd stumbled into a microcosm of unchecked arrogance. Straightening her shoulders, she moved to a nearby bench, settling onto its hard surface with a grace that belied the storm brewing inside. She wouldn't let this pass, not out of spite, but because it mattered. Justice wasn't just a word to her, it was a principle she'd built her life around, a fire that had carried her through every slight and every triumph. As she sat there, her mind churned through her options, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of her boarding pass. She wouldn't be baited into a shouting match, or a petty signature was a luxury she rarely indulged. She had a bigger role to play, and this, she realized, was the opening act. The terminal pulsed around her, a living organism of hurried footsteps and muffled goodbyes. Passengers tugged wheeled bags through the crowd, families exchanged rushed hugs, and the intercom droned with updates about gates and boarding times. Yet Renee's focus remained laser-sharp, her dark eyes trained on the check-in counter. Karen moved through her routine with mechanical precision, her interactions a dance of forced smiles for some and brisk indifference for others. Every so often, her gaze darted toward Renee, her lips tightening with irritation, as if Renee's mere presence was a challenge to her reign. Mike, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the tension simmering around him, his laughter ringing out as he traded quips with Karen or nudged her with a conspiratorial elbow. Renee tilted her head, studying the interplay between them, the way power flowed unchecked in their little domain. The young woman she'd noticed earlier hovered near the edge of the counter, her hands trembling as she processed another passenger's ticket. Her eyes flicked toward Karen, a nervous plea for approval or perhaps a fear of rebuke etched into her features. Renee felt a pang of sympathy for her, a quiet soul caught in the shadow of louder, brasher forces. She wondered what the woman's story was, what dreams or doubts lingered behind those anxious glances. Renee's reverie broke as a commotion erupted at the counter. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit waved his arms, his voice climbing above the terminal's hum. 20 minutes I've been standing here, and now you're telling me my seat's gone? How does that even happen? He demanded, his face flushing with exasperation. Karen's response was smooth, almost rehearsed. Sir, as I've explained, we're dealing with overbooked flights. There's nothing I can do. You'll need to wait for the next one. Her tone carried a faint edge of disdain, as if she were scolding a petulant child. The man muttered a curse and stormed off, his footsteps heavy with defeat. Karen rolled her eyes, her voice carrying to anyone within earshot. Some people just don't get how airlines work. Mike grinned, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Renee exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around her boarding pass as she wrestled with the frustration clawing at her chest. She'd met people like Karen and Mike before, small tyrants who mistook their sliver of control for invincibility. They thrived on the silence of those they dismissed, banking on the fact that most would walk away rather than push back. What gnawed at her more was the quiet acquiescence of the other staff, their heads bowed over keyboards or turned away from the scene. They weren't instigators. but their stillness made them accomplices to the injustice unfolding before her eyes. She traced the words "first class" on her boarding pass, a faint smile tugging at her lips. They had no idea who she was or what was coming. The lesson they'd learn wasn't just about respect. It was about the inevitable fall that followed when power was wielded without accountability. And Renee, calm and resolute, was about to deliver it. A faint buzz hummed against the fabric of Reen's sleek blazer, pulling her focus from the chaotic swirl of the airport terminal. She slipped a hand into her pocket, retrieving her phone with a smooth, practiced motion. The screen glowed with a message from her assistant, Jasmine. "Everything's ready for your arrival. Mr. Bennett can't wait to introduce you to the team." Reen's lips twitched upward, a quiet smile blooming as her fingers danced across the keys. "I'm already getting a front row seat to the team in action. It's quite the eye-opener. Updates coming soon." With a flick of her wrist, she tucked the phone away and rose to her feet, smoothing the crisp lines of her blazer. Each step toward the counter was deliberate, her heels clicking against the tiled floor like the steady tick of a metronome. Aeon, stationed behind the counter, caught sight of her approach and froze, his shoulders squared, his jaw locking as if he'd just bitten into something bitter. The air around him thickened with tension, a silent warning that Reen's presence wasn't welcome at it again. "Yes," Karen snapped, her voice sharp and brittle, slicing through the hum of the terminal. "What now?" Her tone carried the weight of someone who'd already decided the conversation was a nuisance. Before it began, Renee tilted her head slightly, her expression unruffled. "I'd like to confirm the status of my flight," she said, her words steady yet edged with an unshakable authority. "I've been patient, but I need some clarity." Her calm wasn't just a shield, it was a blade, honed to cut through excuses. Karen let out a theatrical sigh, her eyes rolling as if Renee had asked her to move mountains instead of answer a simple question. "Like I told you before," she said, dragging each syllable out like a chore. "You'll just have to wait. We're swamped." She gestured vaguely at the counter, though the line of passengers hardly seemed overwhelming. "Swamped ignoring paying customers." Reen's voice was soft, almost casual, but it landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through Karen's composure. For a fleeting moment, uncertainty flickered in the woman's eyes. Beside her, Mike's smirk wavered, though he quickly buried it beneath a low, mocking chuckle, his fingers drumming lazily against the counter. Karen recovered fast, her gaze narrowing into slits. "Listen, ma'am," she spat, the word dripping with disdain, "if you're going to be difficult, I can call security to deal with you." Her threat hung in the air, bold and brittle. Renee arched an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Security? For asking about my flight? That feels a bit extreme, don't you think?" Her tone was light, but her eyes bore into Karen, steady and unflinching. Karen didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to Mike, muttering something under her breath, words too low for Renee to catch, but sharp enough to draw another snicker from him. Renee observed them with the precision of a hawk, noting the flush creeping up Karen's neck, the way Mike's gaze darted nervously toward the growing crowd of passengers. Their little alliance was a performance, one they'd clearly rehearsed before. Nearby, a young staff member, her name tag reading Emily, glanced over from her post at a neighboring desk. Her wide eyes hesitated on Renee, her lips parting as if she might intervene. But when Karen's head snapped toward her, a glare slicing through the air, Emily's mouth clamped shut. She ducked her head, her cheeks blooming red as she busied herself with a stack of papers. The embarrassment radiating from her was palpable, and Renee felt a pang of sympathy twist in her chest. Inwardly, Renee sighed. This wasn't just about Karen's rudeness or Mike's smug complicity. It was a symptom of something deeper, a festering culture that thrived on apathy and unchecked power. She wasn't here to merely point fingers. Her purpose ran far beyond that. She was tasked with digging into the roots of this dysfunction, exposing how it poisoned every interaction, every passenger who dared to expect decency. Justice, she knew, wasn't just about punishment, it was about dismantling the systems that let people like Karen and Mike wield their petty authority like a cudgel. "Very well," Renee said at last, her voice a smooth thread of resolve. "If you can't assist me, I'll wait." Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smirk, but it withered as Renee continued, "Though I'd suggest you rethink your approach. You never know who might be watching. Karen scoffed, her arms crossing defiantly. I don't need a lecture, ma'am. Take a seat and wait like everyone else. Her dismissal was sharp, a verbal shove meant to push Renee back into the faceless crowd. Renee offered a polite smile, disarming, yet laced with intent, and stepped aside, making way for the next passenger. As she returned to her bench, she felt the weight of curious eyes trailing her. Some passengers cast sympathetic glances, their brows furrowed in quiet solidarity. Others averted their gazes, heads dipping toward phones or boarding passes, unwilling to tangle themselves in the scene. Settling onto the bench, Renee pulled out her phone again, her fingers flying across the screen as she opened her notes app. Observations, dismissive attitudes, zero accountability, passive complicity from junior staff. Next steps, tackle systemic behavior, design training focused on empathy and professionalism. She paused, her thumb hovering over the keys, her gaze drifting back to the counter. Karen and Mike had slipped back into their rhythm, a well-oiled machine of indifference. Karen's sharp voice cut through the air as she waved off another traveler, while Mike lounged against the counter, his laughter growing bolder with each passing minute. They were oblivious to the storm gathering just out of sight. A storm Renee was quietly stoking with every detail she cataloged. A small, determined smile curved her lips. They had no clue what was coming, but soon they'd feel the full weight of it. The terminal buzzed around her, a chaotic symphony of clattering luggage wheels, hurried footsteps, and the staccato beep of overhead announcements. Yet Renee sat poised, her posture as composed as if she were presiding over a boardroom rather than enduring an airport delay. Her sharp eyes tracked every move at the counter, peeling back layers of behavior like an archaeologist unearthing relics. Occasionally, Karen's gaze flicked toward her, narrowing with irritation as if Reen's mere existence was a personal affront. Mike, emboldened by his partner in crime, let his posture slump further, his chuckles ringing out like a taunt. Reen's attention shifted to Emily again. The young woman moved with quiet efficiency, her fingers tapping across the keyboard as she assisted an elderly passenger. Her brow creased with focus, and though her voice was soft, it carried a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the counter's hostility. "Thank you, dear," the older woman said, her smile crinkling the corners of her eyes as she took her boarding pass. Emily returned a shy grin, but it faded the moment the woman turned away. Her shoulders tensed, her eyes darting toward Karen, who was too busy berating another traveler to notice. Renee saw the way Emily seemed to shrink, as if she bore the burden of her colleague's venom despite her own kindness. There was potential in her. Renee thought potential drowned out by the toxic tide she swam in. A new passenger stepped up to the counter, a young man in a hoodie, an oversized backpack slung over one shoulder. Karen barely glanced at him before barking, "You're in the wrong line. Economy's over there." Her finger jabbed toward the left, her tone dripping with assumption. The man faltered, fumbling for his phone. "No, I'm in first class," he said, his voice low as he held up the screen as proof. Karen's eyes flipped to it, her lips pressing into a tight, resentful line. "Fine," she muttered, waving him forward as if she were doing him a favor. "But you should have known better." Mike snickered, leaning closer to Karen. "Probably won a free ticket in a raffle," he muttered, just loud enough to carry. The young man's shoulders stiffened as he walked away, his head dipping slightly. Reen's fingers tightened in her lap, her nails pressing into her palms. Their comments were subtle but venomous, a thread of malice woven into every exchange. Karen's hostility wasn't an anomaly, it was a habit, fed by Mike's corrosive laughter and the silence of those too afraid to challenge it. Each interaction added another stroke to the picture Renee was painting, a portrait of dysfunction that stretched far beyond one rude encounter. This was about power, how it was abused, how it eroded dignity, and how its consequences rippled outward, unnoticed by those who wielded it. Leaning forward, Renee rested her elbows on her knees, her chin brushing her clasped hands. Her mind drifted briefly to the meeting awaiting her later that day. "They'll expect handshakes and small talk," she mused, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Instead, they're getting a masterclass in real time." She thought of the countless others who'd stood at that counter, travelers, without the luxury of a first-class ticket or the confidence to push back. How many had walked away humiliated, their voices snuffed out before they could even rise? The thought stirred something deep in her chest, an ache born of memory and resolve. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her from her reverie. Another message from Jasmine. ETA for the intro. Mr. Bennett wants to sync the announcement. Renee typed back quickly, soon. Gathering critical intel, slipping the phone away, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the terminal's clamor wash over her like a tide. Her calm wasn't an act, it was a weapon, forged in years of navigating spaces that tried to diminish her. A sharp voice shattered her stillness. I'm not dealing with this. Karen's outburst turned heads, drawing gasps and murmurs from the crowd. A middle-aged woman stood at the counter, her face flushed with exhaustion, clutching a boarding pass like a lifeline. My flight's in an hour, she said, her voice trembling on the edge of tears. I just need. Karen cut her off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. I said we're busy. If you can't figure it out, that's your problem. The woman's cheeks burned red as she stepped back, her fingers tightening around the crumpled pass. Renee watched, her jaw tightening. This wasn't just rudeness, it was a lesson in consequences. Karen and Mike thought their power was untouchable, but they'd soon learn how fragile it truly was. Justice wasn't loud or immediate, it was patient, deliberate, and inevitable. And Renee was its architect. Renee sat hunched on the worn bench, her shoulders curved inward as if the weight of the morning had finally pressed her down. Defeat lingered in the slump of her posture, but it was fleeting. With a slow, deliberate breath, she rose once more, this time. Her movements carried a quiet intention, each step heavier, more purposeful than before. She didn't rush toward the counter where the chaos of the terminal buzzed. Instead, her gaze settled on Emily, a young woman stationed at a cluttered desk, her fingers fumbling nervously as she shuffled papers into uneven stacks. The faint rustle of documents blended with the hum of travelers milling about, their voices a dull roar in the cavernous space. Excuse me, Renee said, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the ambient noise like a gentle ripple on still water. Emily's head snapped up, her hazel eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, she froze, her hands hovering over the papers as she took in Renee's serene presence, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of the terminal. Why, yes, Emily stammered, her voice trembling slightly. How can I help you? Renee's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, the kind that radiated warmth without effort. I've been watching how you handle the passengers, she said, her tone laced with quiet admiration. It's not often you see someone so dedicated to doing their job well, especially in a place like this. She gestured subtly to the chaos around them, flickering fluorescent lights overhead, the scuffed linoleum floor, the endless shuffle of impatient travelers. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected praise. Oh, thank you, she mumbled, her cheeks flushing as she cast a quick, anxious glance toward Karen, the supervisor looming like a shadow at the counter. It was as if she braced herself for a sharp rebuke to slice through the moment. You don't need to check over your shoulder, Renee said gently, her voice a soothing balm to Emily's evident unease. I'm just recognizing what you bring to this place. Your effort doesn't go unnoticed, not by me. Emily's tense shoulders softened, and a flicker of gratitude passed through her eyes. Thank you, she said again, this time with a steadier tone, as though Renee's words had anchored her amidst the storm of her workday. With a nod, Renee turned and made her way back to the bench, her steps unhurried, her presence a quiet force that seemed to ripple outward. Karen and Mike, stationed behind the counter, exchanged furtive glances. Renee's calm demeanor had unsettled them, though they masked it beneath their usual swagger. Karen's lips moved, muttering something low and sharp to Mike, who responded with a curt nod. Their bravado held, but cracks were forming, subtle, yet undeniable. Neither dared approach Renee again, though Karen's eyes darted toward her more often now, sharp and probing, while Mike studiously avoided her gaze altogether. The clock above the terminal ticked relentlessly onward, its hands slicing through the minutes. Each second brought Renee closer to the moment she'd been building toward, though for now, she remained still, a portrait of composure on the outside. Inside, her mind churned a precise, relentless storm, cataloging every detail she'd witnessed. She'd seen it all, the cutting insults flung carelessly at passengers, the dismissive waves of Karen's hand, the complicit silence of those who stood by. Each moment stoked the fire simmering deep within her, a righteous anger tempered by patience. Timing, she knew, was everything. She leaned back against the bench, her posture impeccable despite the tension coiling in her chest. Her fingers brushed the edge of her blazer as she replayed the morning's events, her thoughts as sharp as a blade. This wasn't just about incompetence, it was a failure of decency, a betrayal of the trust passengers placed in those who wore the uniform. Across the terminal, Karen and Mike carried on with their routine, but there was a new edge to their movements. Their loud, brash exchanges now carried a thread of unease, their laughter forced and brittle. Karen's gaze flicked to Renee repeatedly, her lips tightening each time, while Mike busied himself with meaningless tasks. His broad shoulders hunched as if he could shrink from the growing weight of the unknown. They hadn't pieced it together yet, but they sensed that something was shifting beneath their feet. Meanwhile, Emily worked diligently at her station, her focus unwavering despite the tremor in her hands whenever Karen swept past. Renee noticed how the young woman flinched at Karen's barked orders, her eyes flickering with a quiet dread she couldn't fully hide. Yet, even under that pressure, Emily's voice remained soft and steady as she guided passengers through their questions, her professionalism a fragile shield against the hostility around her. Renee admired her resilience, though it pained her to see someone so earnest caught in such a toxic web. As the morning rush began to ebb, the terminal grew quieter, the clamor softening into a low murmur. Renee's attention shifted to an older couple approaching the counter. The husband moved slowly, his gnarled hand gripping a cane for support, while his wife clutched their boarding passes in trembling fingers. Their steps were cautious, deliberate, as if each one required a shared resolve. Karen's expression hardened the moment she spotted them, her features twisting into a scowl as though their very presence offended her. "We need assistance," the wife said, her voice quivering with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "My husband has trouble standing for long. Is there a way we could?" Karen cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand, her tone dripping with disdain. "You'll have to wait like everyone else. We're busy right now." The wife hesitated, her eyes darting to her husband, who shifted uncomfortably, his face etched with fatigue. "But we just need a wheelchair," or she began, only for Karen to interrupt again, her sigh loud and theatrical. "I already told you, we're busy. If you can't wait, that's not my problem." A surge of fury flared in Renee's chest, hot and immediate, but she held herself still, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She watched as the couple exchanged a look, frustration, embarrassment, and a quiet resignation passing between them. The wife opened her mouth to protest, but Karen had already turned away. Feigning interest in a stack of papers, Emily, standing nearby, shifted her weight, her discomfort palpable. Her lips parted as if to speak, but fear or perhaps habit kept her silent, her gaze dropping to the desk in defeat. The wife guided her husband to a nearby chair, her shoulders sagging as she sat beside him, her hand resting protectively on his arm. Renee's heart ached as she watched them, her thoughts drifting to her own parents. Her mother's gentle strength had shaped her, instilling a deep belief in treating others with dignity, no matter who they were. Her father, a man of few words but profound action, had lived by a simple truth: you could judge a person's character by how they treated those who could offer them nothing in return. The thought of them facing someone like Karen dismissed, diminished her resolve into something unyielding. She reached for her phone, her fingers steady as she opened her notes app and began typing with meticulous care. Staff behavior assessment, systemic issues rooted in poor leadership, immediate priorities, address lack of empathy, ensure accountability, long-term goals, transform team culture through training, mentorship. She paused, her fingers hovering over the screen, her eyes drifting back to the counter. Karen and Mike were laughing now, their voices grating against the quiet hum of the terminal. The sound grated on her nerves, a stark reminder of their obliviousness. "Actions speak louder than words," she murmured to herself, her voice a low, resolute whisper. The sudden sound of purposeful footsteps pulled her focus. A man in a crisp navy suit entered the terminal, flanked by two assistants, who matched his brisk stride. Renee recognized him instantly. Bennett, the regional manager who had brought her into this role. His presence was magnetic, his every movement exuding authority. Karen noticed him too, her demeanor shifting in an instant. She straightened her posture, smoothing her uniform with quick, nervous hands, and plastered on a saccharine smile. "Mr. Bennett," she called out, her voice suddenly dripping with warmth. Mike, less adept at hiding his unease, simply stood taller, his smirk fading into a look of mild bewilderment. Bennett approached the counter, his expression unreadable. He gave Karen a brief nod before scanning the terminal, his gaze settling on Renee. For a fleeting moment, his stern facade softened, and he offered her a subtle note, an unspoken signal that their plan was unfolding. Renee rose from the bench, her movements slow and deliberate. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing out invisible creases, and began walking toward the counter. Her heels clicked softly against the tiled floor, each step a measured beat in the rising tension. Karen's smile wavered as Renee drew closer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with irritation. Renee didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to Bennett, her calm gaze locking with his. "I think it's time, don't you?" she said quietly. Bennett's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I agree." Karen's confusion deepened, her eyes darting between them. "What's going on?" she demanded, her usual confidence faltering. Renee turned to face her fully, her expression serene yet unyielding. "I'm Renee Parker," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that hushed the surrounding chatter. "Your new regional director." Karen's jaw dropped, her face flushing with a mix of shock and dread. Mike's eyes widened, and he took an instinctive step back, as if distance could shield him from the fallout. "I've spent the last hour observing your team," Renee continued, her tone even but firm. "And what I've seen is unacceptable as a leader and as a person. You've disrespected passengers, undermined your colleagues, and failed to uphold even the most basic standards of decency." Karen stammered. Didn't know, but Renee cut her off, her voice sharpening. "That much is clear, but whether you knew or not doesn't excuse it. Your actions have consequences, and they reflect a deeper roadtone that ends today." In that moment, the terminal seemed to hold its breath. Emily looked up from her station, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and relief. The older couple watched from their seats, their weary faces brightening with a flicker of hope. Justice, Renee knew, wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration, about ensuring that power was wielded with care, not cruelty. And as she stood there, unwavering, she felt the weight of that lesson settle into her bones. The tide had turned, and she would see it through. The air in the terminal felt thick, almost suffocating, as the sharp sting of Renee Parker's words sliced through the usual hum of travelers and clattering luggage. Karen Thompson's face, once flushed with the arrogance of unchecked authority, now drained to a ghostly white, her carefully constructed facade of bravado crumbling like a sandcastle under a relentless tide. Her fingers clutched the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles gleamed pale against the dark surface, as if anchoring herself against the storm of accountability bearing down on her. Behind her, Mike Jacobs shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his broad shoulders hunching inward as though he could shrink into the shadows and escape the weight of his own complicity. His eyes darted nervously toward the floor, the smug grin he'd worn earlier dissolving into a grimace of unease that tugged at the corners of his mouth. Renee stepped forward, her polished shoes clicking softly against the tile, her presence a quiet force that seemed to hush the chaos of the bustling terminal. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast faint shadows across her composed features, her dark eyes steady and unyielding as they locked onto Karen. "This isn't just about you," she said, her voice softening for a fleeting moment, like a breeze cutting through the heat of a summer day. "It's about something bigger, building a place where every person, whether they're dragging a suitcase through this terminal or clocking in for a shift, feels seen, respected, and valued." Her words lingered in the stillness, heavy with purpose, rippling through the air like stones dropped into a glassy pond. For a brief heartbeat, the world around them seemed to pause. The clamor of rolling wheels, the distant announcements crackling over the intercom, the hurried footsteps of passengers still faded into a muted hum. Travelers nearby slowed their pace, some stopping altogether, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. A man with a worn leather briefcase tilted his head, his brow furrowing as he watched. while a young woman clutching a coffee cup whispered something to her companion, her eyes wide with intrigue. Even the air felt charged, as if the terminal itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen's lips parted, then closed again, her throat working silently as she scrambled to regain her footing. The confidence she'd wielded like a weapon just moments ago had abandoned her, leaving her exposed and faltering. Mike, still hovering at her shoulder, rubbed the back of his neck, his face a mask of discomfort as he avoided Renee's piercing gaze. Behind the counter, Emily, the youngest of the staff, peeked up from her station. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her wide hazel eyes flickering with a mix of awe and tentative hope, as if she were witnessing the first crack of light breaking through a long, oppressive darkness. Renee let the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping across the counter like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Then, with a voice as steady as steel and as clear as a bell, she spoke again. "What I've witnessed here today isn't just a lapse in customer service," she began, each word deliberate, measured, and sharp with intent. "It's a collapse of empathy, a betrayal of professionalism, and a disregard for the basic decency every human being deserves." Karen flinched, her grip tightening on the counter until her hands trembled faintly. "Miss Parkeru." "Director Parker," she stammered, her voice cracking with a desperate edge. "Didn't know it was you. I didn't realize." Renee tilted her head, her expression cool and unshaken, a faint arch of her brow betraying a flicker of disbelief. "And why should that change anything?" she asked, her tone calm yet piercing, like a needle threading through fabric. "Would you have treated me with more care if you'd known my title? Is your respect so fragile that it only extends to those you think can hold you accountable?" Karen's mouth opened again, but before she could muster a reply, Renee raised a hand, her gesture firm yet graceful, silencing the excuse before it could take shape. "This isn't about me," she continued, her voice steady but threaded with a quiet resolve. "It's about every weary traveler who stood here, clutching their boarding pass, only to be brushed off, belittled, or ignored. It's about the culture you've nurtured where disrespect festers unchecked, and professionalism is an afterthought tossed aside like trash." With a deliberate motion, Renee reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out her phone, holding it aloft like a judge presenting evidence. "I came here today as a passenger," she said, her voice unwavering as she turned the device in her hand, the screen glinting under the terminal lights. "But I also came to watch, to listen, and to record everything I've seen." Karen's face blanched further, her eyes widening in a mix of dread and disbelief, as if the ground beneath her had begun to crumble. Mike's gaze snapped to the phone, his jaw clenching tight, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Emily, though, straightened ever so slightly, a flicker of relief softening her tense features, her lips parting in a quiet breath. "Your behavior," Renee said, her eyes locking onto Karen with unrelenting focus, "has been nothing short of disgraceful. Dismissing passengers with real concerns, mocking them without a shred of sham. I have shown utter contempt for the very people you're paid to serve." She turned her attention to Mike, who recoiled as if her gaze were a physical blow. "And you," she said, her tone sharpening like a blade honed on stone, "you've been right there with her, every step of the way. Your snickers, your snide remarks are not just unprofessional, they're poison, seeping into this place and corroding it from the inside." Mike's mouth opened, his voice stumbling over itself. Tu was just following Karen's lead. "She's the supervisor, I thought." Renee's eyes narrowed, cutting through his excuse like a wire through clay. "And that absolves you?" she asked, her voice low and biting. "You had a choice, Mr. Jacobs. You could have stood up to this rot, but instead you chose to wallow in it, to prop it up with your laughter and your cowardice." Mike's face flushed, his hands balling into fists at his sides, but he said nothing, his defiance wilting under the weight of her words. Then Renee's gaze softened as it shifted to Emily, who stood frozen behind the counter, her hands clasped tightly together. "And you," Renee said, her voice gentling like a hand extended in reassurance. "I've watched you today. I see someone who wants to do what's right, but feels caught in a web she didn't spin." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, shimmering under the harsh lights as she gave a small, trembling nod. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. quaking with the fear of consequences she'd carried too long. I was scared I'd lose everything if I spoke up. Renee's expression warmed, a quiet understanding passing between them. I know, she said softly, her tone a balm against Emily's frayed nerves. But silence only feeds this kind of behavior. Real change begins when you find the strength to lift your voice, even when it shakes. Turning back to Karen and Mike, Renee squared her shoulders, her demeanor shifting back to ironclad resolve. Effective immediately, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. Both of you are suspended, pending a full investigation into your conduct. Karen's jaw dropped, a gasp escaping her as indignation flared in her chest. You can't do this, she cried, her voice rising in a shrill protest. I've given years to this companions. Renee's gaze didn't waver, her response cold and unyielding. And that makes your actions all the more shameful. You, of all people, should have known better. Mike's face twisted, a storm of anger and resignation brewing behind his eyes. But he held his tongue, perhaps sensing the futility of arguing. Renee gestured toward a security officer standing a few paces away, his uniform crisp and his expression impassive as he watched the scene unfold. Security will escort you out, she said, her tone final. You'll have a chance to explain yourselves during the review process. Until then, you're not to set foot in this terminal. The officer stepped forward, his boots heavy against the floor, and motioned for Karen and Mike to follow. Karen shot Renee a venomous glare, her lips pressed into a thin line. But the fire in her had dimmed. She turned sharply, her movements stiff with barely contained fury, and stormed off, her heels clicking like gunfire. Mike trailed behind, his head bowed, his steps slow and reluctant, as if each one dragged him deeper into the consequences of his choices. As the pair vanished into the crowd, the tension that had gripped the terminal began to unravel, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope. Renee turned to the remaining staff, her expression firm yet not without compassion. This is a crossroads, she said, addressing them as a group, her voice steady and clear. We can rebuild this team, forge a culture rooted in respect, professionalism, and empathy that starts with each of you. It's not just about what you do, it's about the space you help shape. Her gaze settled on Emily, who stood a little taller under the attention, her hands steadier now. You've shown real promise today, Renee said, her tone warm and encouraging. I want to see you grow in a place where you can hold your head high, proud of the work you do. Emily's face brightened, a tentative smile breaking through her earlier uncertainty. Thank you, she murmured, her voice soft but sure. As the staff returned to their tasks, a renewed energy buzzed faintly through the air. Renee stepped aside, watching as Emily greeted the next passenger with a grace she hadn't shown before. Her voice steady, her movements confident. A quiet satisfaction settled over Renee, a flicker of pride warming her chest. This was only the first step, a small victory in a larger battle, but it was a start. She had arrived as an observer, blending into the crowd with her unassuming presence. But she was leaving as a catalyst, determined to root out the rot and plant something better in its place. Karen and Mike's figures faded into the distance, escorted by the officer, their shadows swallowed by the sea of travelers. The terminal exhaled, its rhythm returning, but for Renee, the work was far from over. She lingered near the counter, her eyes tracing the faces of the staff, some relieved, others uncertain, their postures stiff with the weight of what they'd witnessed. Emily, though, stood out, her hands still trembling faintly as she typed, but her shoulders squared, her voice carrying a newfound strength. Renee took a slow, deliberate breath, grounding herself in the moment. She'd learned long ago that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about consequences, about showing that power misused would always come at a cost. And as she watched Emily bloom, even just a little, she knew this was the deeper lesson, that from the ashes of accountability, something stronger, truer, could rise. Amid the bustling chaos of the terminal, Renee stood poised, her sharp eyes catching the fleeting, uneasy glances exchanged between the staff members huddled nearby. With a subtle clearing of her throat, she raised her voice just enough to cut through the ambient noise. May I have your attention, please? Her tone was steady, infused with an unmistakable authority that didn't demand, but compelled obedience. Instantly, the scattered employees paused, hands hovering over keyboards. Conversations trailing off mid-sentencing turned their full attention to her. The air grew heavy, charged with anticipation, as their focus converged on the woman who seemed to carry the weight of the room effortlessly. "This morning has been eye-opening," Renee began, her words deliberate, each syllable measured as if she were laying bricks for a foundation. "I didn't come here to throw your routines into disarray or point fingers. My goal was to step into your world, to see the gears turning behind the scenes. And what I've witnessed has painted a vivid picture of struggles you wrestle with daily, but also of untapped potential we can harness, not just as lone workers, but as a united front." She paused, letting the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping over the faces before her. Some met her eyes with curiosity, others with faint apprehension, but all felt the gravity of her presence settle over them like a thick fog. The stillness in the terminal was almost suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of jet engines and the occasional shuffle of a passenger's suitcase. Renee's voice cut through it again, firm yet laced with an edge of resolve. "Let me be crystal clear," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as they roamed the group. "What I saw from certain individuals today, behaviors dripping with disrespect, mockery, and a chilling indifference ethos, aren't just missteps. They're a betrayal of everything this company stands for. They have no place here." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. Some shifted in their shoes, their faces tightening with guilt or agreement, while others stared at the floor, avoiding the piercing weight of her judgment. Then her tone softened, a faint warmth breaking through the steel. "But this isn't only about tearing down what's broken, it's about building something better. Every single one of you holds a piece of this puzzle, shaping a workplace where respect isn't a buzzword, where professionalism isn't optional, and where empathy isn't a weakness. This is your moment to step up, to rise above the mess and make it right." Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge wrapped in an invitation. The employees nodded slowly, some with hesitant conviction, others still processing the call to action echoing in their minds. Among them, Gregory, a seasoned staff member with graying hair and a weathered face, stood out. His hands fidgeted at his sides, betraying the unease swirling in his chest. After a beat of hesitation, he stepped forward, his voice cautious but steady. "Director Parker," he started, his eyes flickering briefly to his colleagues as if seeking their silent approval. "I think I speak for a lot of us when I say we've been fed up for a while. Karensha had this knack for making everything harder, not just for the passengers, but for us too. It wore us down." His admission hung there, raw and unguarded, a crack in the facade of stoic professionalism. Renee tilted her head, her expression softening with a flicker of understanding. "Thank you for that honesty, Gregory," she replied, her voice gentle yet probing. "But let me ask you something. What held you back from saying something sooner?" Gregory's shoulders slumped slightly, his gaze dropping to the scuffed linoleum floor. He rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture heavy with years of unspoken frustration. "It's tough to speak up when you're convinced no one's listening," he confessed, his voice quieter now. Karensha was tight with some of the higher-ups. Pushing back felt like slamming your head against a brick wall, pointless, and you just end up bruised. Renee's eyes softened further, a spark of empathy lighting them. "That's a real fear," she acknowledged, her tone measured but kind. "And it shines a glaring spotlight on something we can't ignore, not just here, but everywhere in this organization. When people feel silenced, when they're afraid their voices will just echo into nothing, that's when a culture crumbles. It fails every in a staff, passengers, the whole system." She turned to the others, her posture straightening as her voice grew firm again. "If you take one thing from today, let it be this: you will be heard. I'm here to make sure of that. But I can't carry this alone. I need you to meet me halfway, to stand up for yourselves and each other." As the group murmured their assent and began drifting back to their posts, Renee's attention shifted to Emily, a younger employee hovering at the edge of the scene. Her hands twisted nervously, her fingers knotting together as if she were trying to hold herself steady. When the crowd thinned, Renee approached her, her steps deliberate but unhurried. "Emily," she said softly, her voice a lifeline in the storm of the younger woman's thoughts. "Can we talk for a moment?" Emily nodded quickly, her movements jerky as she followed Renee to a quieter corner of the terminal. away from the clatter of luggage and the buzz of impatient travelers. The faint hum of the overhead lights buzzed above them as they stood there, the distant chaos of the terminal fading into a muted backdrop. Renee studied Emily for a moment, noting the way her eyes darted nervously, as if she were still bracing for judgment. "You held your own out there today," Renee said, her tone warm but steady. "Even when things got messy, you didn't back down." Emily's gaze dropped, her voice barely a whisper as it slipped out. "I wanted to do more," she admitted, her words trembling with self-doubt. "But I was scared, too scared to really step in." Renee's expression softened further, a quiet compassion settling over her features. "That's not unusual," she reassured her. "Fear can lock you in place, especially in a pressure cooker like this. But what I saw, what matters is that you cared enough to push through it. That's not weakness, Emily. That's strength waiting to grow." Emily lifted her eyes, meeting Renee's steady gaze, a flicker of hope breaking through the haze of her uncertainty. "Do you really think things can get better here?" she asked, her voice fragile, teetering on the edge of belief. Renee didn't hesitate, her eyes locking onto Emily's with unwavering certainty. "I don't just think they can, I know they will," she said firmly. "But it starts with people like you, people who feel the weight of what's wrong and still want to fix it." A small, tentative smile tugged at Emily's lips, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the words sank in. "I'll try my hardest," she murmured, her voice soft but resolute. Renee placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture solid and grounding. "That's all I could ever ask," she replied, her smile warm and encouraging. As the day stretched on, a subtle shift rippled through the terminal. The remaining staff moved with a newfound rhythm, their interactions with passengers sharper, more intentional. Gone was the half-hearted apathy that had once clouded their efforts. In its place was a quiet determination, a spark of purpose flickering to life. Renee observed from a distance, her presence a steady anchor amid the flurry of activity. Occasionally, she stepped in, offering a gentle correction to a flustered agent or a nod of approval to a job well. Donna, her guidance subtle but unwavering. By the time her meeting with Mr. Bennett loomed on the horizon, Renee felt a quiet swell of satisfaction. The road ahead was long, littered with obstacles yet to be tackled, but the first seeds of transformation had taken root. As she made her way toward the conference room, she cast a final glance back at the counter. There was Emily, her posture straighter now, assisting a young family with a calm assurance that hadn't been there before. She explained their boarding process with patience, her voice steady as the children tugged at their parents' hands. Catching Renee's eye, Emily offered a small wave, a gesture brimming with tentative pride. Renee returned it, her lips curving into a warm, approving smile. The meeting room was a stark contrast to the terminal's frenetic energy. Its frosted glass walls dulled the distant clamor, cocooning the space in a stillness that felt almost reverent. Renee stepped inside, her pace measured, her senses drinking in the details. Sleek, minimalist table, the ergonomic chairs arranged with precision, the large screen on the wall glowing faintly with the company's logo. Mr. Bennett was already there, seated with an air of relaxed authority, his suit crisp and his demeanor unruffled. He exuded the quiet confidence of a man who'd navigated countless high-stakes moments, his presence filling the room without effort. As Renee entered, he looked up, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Renee," he greeted, rising to offer a handshake, his tone carrying a note of genuine anticipation. "I've been eager to hear your take on today." She met his grip firmly, her own voice even but tinged with warmth. "And I've been looking forward to laying it out for you." After a brief exchange of pleasantries, they settled across from each other, the table a silent divide between them. Renee's composure never wavered, though her mind buzzed with the morning's events. Each moment distilled into sharp, actionable clarity. This was her chance to turn observation into impact. Mr. Bennett leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Before we dive in," he said, "I want to thank you for how you handled things out there. Words already trickling back, your presence stirred something up. And it sounds like it's for the better." Renee inclined her head, a faint acknowledgement of his words. "I appreciate that," she replied, "but the shift isn't mine to claim. It's a reflection of what I saw of good, the bad, and what we need to fix." He nodded, settling back in his chair. "All right then, Let's hear it. Walk me through it all. Renee launched into her debrief with meticulous care, painting a vivid picture of the morning's unraveling. She described Karen's biting sarcasm and Mike's lazy disregard, their actions like cracks in a dam threatening to burst. She spoke of the staff's quiet fear, their reluctance to challenge the status quo, and the ripple effect it had on passengers' frustration etched into every delayed response, every curt exchange. The heart of it, she said, her voice steady but firm, isn't just a few bad apples. It's a deeper road to culture that shrugs at accountability and buries voices under apathy. Karen and Mike, they're the symptoms. The disease is bigger. Mr. Bennett's fingers steepled beneath his chin, his brow furrowing as he absorbed her words. That's a tough pill to swallow, he admitted, his tone thoughtful. But it's one we can't dodge. Renee pressed on, her observations razor-sharp as she recounted specific moments. The way Karen had dismissed a passenger's plea with a sneer, the way Mike had lounged at his post while lines grew longer. Yet she didn't linger on the failures alone. She highlighted glimmers of promise, like Emily's quiet resolve, her instinct to help even when fear held her back. There's potential here, Renee said. People who want to rise above just need the structure, the support, and the leadership to pull it off. With the problems laid bare, Renee shifted gears, her voice taking on a new energy as she outlined her vision. First, we need training, real training. Not just how to punch tickets or check bags, but how to listen, how to de-escalate, how to care. From the greenest rookie to the grayest veteran, everyone's in. Mr. Bennett nodded, his stylus scratching notes onto a tablet. Makes sense. What else? She leaned forward slightly, her proposals unfolding with precision. Second, we need a system, clear, ironclad accountability. People need to know their actions matter, good or bad, and they need to trust that speaking up won't just get them shut down. Her words carried a deeper weight, a lesson carved from the morning's chaos. Justice isn't just punishment. For the guilty, it's empowerment for the silenced. The consequences of unchecked power, like Karen's reign of petty tyranny, had festered too long, eroding trust and morale. Renee's vision wasn't just repair, it was revolution, a reclaiming of a workplace where every voice could stand tall. As she spoke, Mr. Bennett's expression shifted from contemplation to resolve, the seeds of her ideas taking root in his mind, just as they had begun to sprout in the terminal beyond the glass walls. Renee Parker sat across from Mr. Bennett, her posture firm yet relaxed, her hands resting lightly on the polished oak table that stretched between them. The room was bathed in the soft glow of late morning light filtering through the tall windows of the terminal's administrative wing, casting faint patterns on the walls. She could still hear the distant hum of the bustling airport, beyond the door clatter of luggage wheels, the murmur of passengers, the occasional sharp announcement over the intercom. It was a world she'd stepped into with purpose, and now, as she spoke, her voice carried the weight of conviction. Employees need to understand that every choice they make echoes outward, she said, her eyes meeting Mr. Bennett's with unwavering focus. There are rewards for diligence and integrity, but there are also consequences when those standards slip. We can't just hope for accountability, have to build it. That means consistent performance evaluations, spaces where people can voice concerns without fear of being named, and a clear, visible commitment to upholding the rules we set. Mr. Bennett leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His face betrayed little, his sharp gray eyes studying her as though peeling back layers to see what lay beneath her words. After a moment, he gave a slow, approving nod. Well said, he replied, his tone warm but measured. And the third point, Renee shifted forward slightly, the faintest spark of passion igniting in her chest. We have to give people the power to speak, she said. Fear grows in the shadows of silence, it festers there, letting wrongdoing take root. If we want real change, we need an environment where raising a red flag doesn't mean risking your job or your peace. Safety isn't just physical, it's emotional, too. Her words hung in the air, sharp and resolute, and for a fleeting second, she wondered if she'd pushed too far. But Mr. Bennett didn't flinch. He tilted his head, his expression still a mask, though a flicker of something respect perhaps crossed his features. You've clearly thought this through, he said at last, his voice softening. It's no mystery why we chose you for this role. With that, the conversation pivoted. The air shifted from theory to action as they dove into the gritty details timelines, stretching weeks into months, resources that would need to be pulled from tight budgets, and strategies to turn her vision into reality. His questions came fast, each one a test, but there was a collaboration in his tone that Renee hadn't expected. She found herself grateful for it, for the way he leaned into her ideas rather than dismissing them outright. As they spoke, her mind wandered briefly, drifting back to the terminal floor she'd walked through that morning. She could see Emily in her mind's eye, a young woman with tired shoulders, but a quiet determination, hunched over a counter cluttered with boarding passes and crumpled coffee cups. Emily didn't complain, didn't falter, even when the chaos of the day pressed down on her. Renee's thoughts lingered on the passengers, two elderly couples she'd seen earlier, their hands clasped tightly as they navigated the crowded lines, and the young man in the faded hoodie, his jaw tight with frustration after a curt exchange with a staff member. They'd been dismissed, their dignity trampled underfoot, and they had no way to fight back. It struck her then, deeper than before, this wasn't just about rules or systems. It was about restoring something fundamental, about making dignity the floor everyone stood on, not a rare gift bestowed by chance. Near the end of their meeting, Mr. Bennett leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze piercing but earnest. "Renee, I need your honest take," he said, his voice low. "What do you think of the staff as a whole? Do we have the right people to pull this off?" She paused, letting the question settle. Her mind churned through the faces she'd encountered, Karen's sharp tongue and Mike's lazy arrogance, both of them thorns in the team's side, dragging morale into the dirt. Then there was Emily, a glimmer of promise buried beneath the weight of neglect. "There's potential here," Renee said finally, her tone careful but firm. "But potential doesn't bloom on its own. It needs care, direction. Karen and Micah, they are roadblocks, no question. They've let power twist into something ugly, and it's cost us. But others, like Emily, she's raw, unpolished, but there's something real there. With the right support, I think this team could surprise us." A faint smile tugged at Mr. Bennett's lips, softening the hard lines of his face. "Good to hear," he said, "and I'm counting on you to steer them there." The meeting wrapped shortly after, and as Renee rose from her chair, a quiet satisfaction settled over her. The road ahead loomed long and steep. She wasn't naive about that, but she felt equipped, backed by a trust she hadn't fully anticipated. Stepping back into the terminal, she noticed the shift immediately. The air felt lighter, less choked with tension. Emily stood behind the counter, her movements still hesitant, but her shoulders a touch straighter. When their eyes met, Renee offered a small, deliberate note, a silent promise of support. Emily's lips curved into a broader smile, her confidence unfurling like a flower catching the first rays of sun. Around her, other staff members moved with a new purpose. Espions stiffened, hands quicker as they sorted tickets and answered questions. Renee lingered there, soaking it in. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was a start. She took a deep breath and headed for the exit, the sun now climbing higher, its light pouring through the terminal's towering glass walls. It bathed the space in a golden warmth, chasing away the shadows that had clung to the corners. As she stepped outside, the crisp afternoon air hit her face, sharp and invigorating. She paused, letting the day's events sink in. The sunlight glinted off the terminal's sleek facade, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pavement, reminders of the work still waiting, the battles yet to be fought. Change wasn't a switch flipped in a single meeting. It was a slow, deliberate march. Inside, the terminal buzzed on, a living thing still riddled with flaws. But something had cracked open, a shift in the currents that had once stagnated under apathy and abuse. Karen and Mike's reign of petty tyranny had crumbled, their downfall a quiet justice that spoke louder than any reprimand. They'd wielded their small slivers of power like weapons, cutting down those beneath them. But now the consequences had caught up. It was a lesson Renee wouldn't let fade. Authority without accountability was a poison, seeping into every corner until it rotted the whole structure. And then there was Emily, steady, unassuming Emily, whose courage shone not in loud defiance, but in the way she kept going, day after day. She was the pulse of this place, the kind of person who could carry a team if given half a chance. Renee thought again of the passengers, ones who'd been brushed off, ignored, or snapped at. Their silent struggles fueled her resolve. Every interaction mattered. Every moment of respect or neglect rippled outward. She wanted them to walk through these doors and feel seen, not just processed. As she crossed the parking lot, her steps steady against the asphalt, Renee's mind raced ahead. Training sessions needed crafting hours spent teaching not just procedure but principle. Accountability wouldn't hold without a framework, and trust wouldn't grow without effort. She slid into her car, the leather cool against her back, and let her thoughts settle. Today had been a spark of fragile, flickering proof that even the most stubborn systems could bend. Her phone buzzed as she turned the key, the engine humming to life. A message from Mr. Bennett flashed across the screen. "Great work today, Renee. The board's already taking notice. Can't wait to see what's next." She smiled faintly, setting the phone aside. The praise was nice, but it wasn't the point. This was about building something lasting, a culture where respect wasn't a buzzword, but a bedrock. Pulling out of the lot, the road unfurled before her, drenched in the afternoon's golden light. It stretched wide and open, a mirror to the journey she'd begun. Renee wasn't here just to enforce rules or crack down on the Karens and Mikes of the world. She was here to lift up the Emilys, to remind everyone, from the staff sweeping floors to the passengers clutching boarding passes, that they deserved better. It wouldn't happen in a day or a week, but step by careful step, she'd carve out that change. Justice wasn't loud here. It was steady, relentless, a tide wearing down stone. And as she merged onto the highway, the horizon sprawling endless before her, Renee felt the weight of that truth settle in her bones. Real leadership wasn't about power, it was about purpose,